The idea is to have clout and to gain clout so that we can work for change in our society, progressive change that emphasizes compassion and just policies in government, both locally at the state level and at the federal level. And unless we band together, we're not going to be able to accomplish much alone.
I'm very glad to be here, and I hope that you'll dig deep and raise some more money for this network, which is so important, so essential to progressive change in the United States. If you're a member of this group, you're standing up for peace and justice activists around the country who don't have a chance to interview all the candidates, who don't have a chance to see them, who don't have a chance to get them on record, and who don't have a chance to set the tone for the beginning of the primary season. When the FBI or some such agency was sniffing around this room or rooms at Drake where subversive Catholics were said to be meeting. A time of great paranoia and chill as good people fell in line to support the president's faith-based venture, not the domestic social programs, but the war in Iraq. After 9/11, and in the run-up to Iraq, there wasn't a much lonelier position to take than opposition to the war that was coming. The Chicago Peace Council, which is similar to your organization here in Iowa, and they wanted to take the brave step of putting up a platform for a rally in Chicago against the war in Iraq. And they invited a young man named Barack Obama to be a speaker. And he gave a speech saying that the Iraq war was a dumb war. It wasn't the most articulate of Barack Obama's speeches, but he got right to the point. He said it was a dumb war. If it wasn't for those people in the peace movement in Chicago who knew about him and put the rally together at a time when it was distinctly unpopular, and they were really looking for somebody with some respectability, they got Barack Obama, and that gave him the issue, in the campaign sense, the narrow issue that allowed him to justify a challenge to pretty much the whole Democratic Party. Take away the war in Iraq, take away his speech, it would have been difficult for people to understand what the difference was. What was he running on? And that brought him to Iowa and brought him the nomination. And if it wasn't for the anti-war movement playing that small specific part, we wouldn't have a presidential candidate opposed to the war in Iraq and calling for a withdrawal of troops in 16 months. So you get some credit for that. But in this world, the media will never give you the credit, so you need to applaud yourselves, thank yourselves. But you don't want the role of activists and social movements to be just written out of history by journalists who miss the whole point usually, or catch it later. So I'm going to tell you this story about the rise of an anti-war movement that has been very effective and very invisible since that day in 2002. Actually, the biggest protest that I know of in the history of anti-war movements around the planet, February 15th, 2003. And my thinking about that is this: it wasn't a rise of radicalism, there was this feeling that maybe the world could appeal to, the movements could appeal to the governments, and the governments could stop the march to war by bringing the matter before the United Nations. People go into the streets when they feel they're not getting leadership from their government, but they see some ray of hope. So there were people from the North Pole to the South Pole. As soon as the war was underway, there followed a period of depression, I suppose, or back to the drawing boards. But people were back out again at the end of 2003. There were 100,000 people. As a matter of fact, in the 4 or 5 years since then, there have been 11 demonstrations of more than 100,000 people, 3 of them in the 400,000 to 600,000 range. And that's not recorded either, but that is a significant number of times to go out in those numbers. In our generation, we had to break down the doors, sometimes literally, sometimes symbolically. But remember, if you were 20 in my time, you could be drafted if you were a guy, but you could not vote. So we were structurally excluded, along with black people under Jim Crow in the South. That was about 25, 30 million people who were fully grown adults and subject to the laws of war, but had no rights to participate as citizens. So we were outside, not by choice, but by the fact of the matter. So there was this mythic image of the anti-war movement of the past that sat like a shadow over the new anti-war movement of the present, which didn't really have to be beaten or gassed to make the point, because they could vote and they could organize within the mainstream. I'll give you just one example of several. Maybe I'll give you a couple. But the big one in my mind is Move On. Move On starts with an organization of about 4 people in Berkeley. Move On members gave $180 million to federal candidates. It's unbelievable. Public opinion had changed in a way that was protective to artists and actors against the war. As the caucuses, like Iowa, approached, you can track it. The number of members of the Congress, House, and Senate who started voting for a deadline to get out rose steadily. The number who were willing to be on record to vote for defunding or defunding in a few months or a year rose. And that was in direct response to public opinion and what was coming by word of mouth out of places like Iowa. It was still, the driving force was public opinion, not the elected officials. They would follow if people like yourselves were out there in the lead. I thought it was quite amazing. And by then, Barak was the only person who had established this early position, and so it was natural that the peace movement in general, in broad terms, would flow towards his campaign, although there were many for Hillary Clinton, there were many for some of the others, but you had this welding of the Barack Obama campaign and the anti-Iraq movement that became a solid force in state after state, state after state, and it carried him. It was certainly not the only reason, not at all, but it was the issue that he could use again and again to dissociate himself from the other Democrats. What we didn't win in 2006 when Congress was changed reappeared as another oasis called Obama, and the hope was that Obama would deliver us from Iraq. I mean, the list of differences is a long one. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, Israel, Palestine, offshore drilling, nuclear power, domestic spying. There's quite a list here. But I think that there are people on the left in this country who think because they disagree with Barak on these issues, they shouldn't vote for him or shouldn't put any effort into this campaign. That's a complete misreading, I think, of how things work. But I don't think anyone is quite ready for the scale of the turnout, for the flood of people who are coming in to vote versus the number of ballot boxes and tables and registrars. It would be a big mistake to sit back and think that now the problems are taken care of. I personally think, and I'm sure you agree, that the movement for Barak will be the basis of social activism in the United States for at least the next 20 or 30 years. I think that we'll have to pressure the new president, whoever it is.
We are looking, of course, also for financial support. This is a fundraiser this evening, but we need ongoing financial support from individuals as well as from organizations.